My name is Elara, and this is the story of how I poured my entire inheritance, my very history, into a man who saw me not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. It started 5 years ago in a dusty garage. Leo was all wild hair, brilliant eyes, and dreams that spilled out of him like blueprints. He was an engineer, a visionary, he said. He had designed a new type of water purification pump, one that could be built cheaply and could change lives in remote villages. He showed me sketches on napkins, spoke with a passion that was infectious. I was a graphic designer, living a comfortable, quiet life, the kind funded by a small but precious inheritance from my grandmother. I had her house, her jewelry, a safety net. Leo had nothing but a dream, and I fell in love with both. The first investment was small, a few thousand for better tools, then it was 10,000 for prototype parts. "It's just a loan, Elara," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "The first thing the company does is pay you back with interest." I believed him. I saw the fire in him, and I wanted to fan the flames. Then came the big hurdle. He needed a specialized microfilter matrix, a component that cost more than my car. I saw the light in his eyes dimming. He talked about giving up, getting a real job. The thought of that dream dying was unbearable. That's when I made the first big cut. I sold my grandmother's emerald necklace, a piece I loved, a piece that held the scent of her perfume. I told Leo my freelance work had been exceptionally good. I gave him $60,000. The look of relief and triumph on his face felt like a reward. It was enough. The pump worked. The prototype was crude, loud, but it turned muddy water clean. We celebrated with cheap champagne in that garage, and I'd never been happier. But success on a small scale wasn't enough. He needed to manufacture it, to patent it, to market it. The sums he needed became terrifying. I sold my grandmother's house. The house I grew up in, with its creaky porch swing and the garden she loved. The money from that sale bought Leo his patent and paid for the first small production run. I moved into his cramped apartment, telling myself it was a practical choice for our future. Our future. That was the phrase that justified everything. And then it happened. A tech blog wrote about him, an angel investor flew in. Suddenly Leo was Leo Sterling, the wunderkind engineer. He got a real office. He started wearing suits. The garage was a memory he now found embarrassing. He worked late constantly. His texts became short, dismissive. "In a meeting." "Too busy." I was so blind. I thought it was just the stress of his new success. I planned a special dinner at our old favorite, cheap Italian place to remind him of us. I waited for 2 hours. He never showed up. When I finally got a text, it wasn't an apology. It was a breakup. He wrote that we had grown apart, that he was on a different path now, that he would always be grateful for my support. Grateful. The word felt like a slap. A week later, I saw the press release. Aquasphere Inc., led by visionary CEO Leo Sterling, secures $50 million in Series A funding. There was a picture of him, surrounded by investors, shaking hands. He was wearing a watch that cost more than my grandmother's house. I was erased. My money, my sacrifices, my belief, it was all just a line item in his success, an inconvenient debt he had no intention of repaying, financially or emotionally. The man I loved, the man whose dreams I carried on my back until my own spine cracked, had reached the summit and kicked the ladder away, with me still on it. I was a ghost in the story of his life, but a ghost knows all the secrets, and I was no longer the quiet, believing girl who sold her emeralds for a dream. I was a woman who had been sold a lie, and I was just beginning to understand the price he would truly have to pay. The silence in my apartment was louder than any sound I had ever known. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb the very air. For days, I moved through the rooms like a phantom, the ghost of the woman I used to be. I didn't cry. The tears felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a tribute to a pain that was too profound for such a simple release. My phone was a brick of accusations. His name had vanished from my contacts, but the memory of his number was seared into my mind, a cruel, useless tattoo. Grateful, that word echoed. It was the currency he had used to pay his debt, and it was worthless. I had to know. The need was a physical ache, a sickness in my gut. I Googled him. Leo Sterling, Aquasphere. The search returned a flood of results. Polished articles, glowing profiles, videos of him on stage at tech conferences, speaking with a smooth, corporate confidence that was utterly foreign to me. This wasn't the man who had explained the beauty of a gear ratio with grease on his cheek. This was a CEO, a brand. I clicked on a news video from a week prior. There he was, standing before a sleek, silver prototype of the community pump, my pump, the one that had been born in a haze of solder smoke and shared dreams. It was now called the Aquasphere One, a name that sounded cold and proprietary. The Aquasphere isn't just a product, he said into the microphone, his voice calm and assured. It's a promise of a brighter, healthier future for communities off the grid. The camera panned to the audience, a sea of admiring faces, and then it caught her. Sitting in the front row, her gaze fixed on him with a look of rapt admiration. She was elegant, blonde, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking cream-colored suit. The chyron at the bottom of the screen identified her. Aria Whitmore, venture capitalist, Whitmore and Sons. Aria Whitmore. Of course, I knew the name. Her family was old money, their tentacles deep in tech and politics. She wasn't just an investor, she was a gateway. A gateway to the kind of legitimacy and social standing my grandmother's emerald necklace could never buy. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. I wasn't just abandoned, I was upgraded. My support had been a bridge, sturdy and functional, to get him across the chasm. But Arya was the golden city on the other side. He hadn't just outgrown me, he had traded up. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the fog of my grief. This wasn't a heartbreak to be mourned. It was a crime to be prosecuted. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had stolen my legacy. The house, the jewels, they weren't just assets. They were my grandmother's love, solidified. They were the scent of her rose garden, the weight of her history on my neck, the safety of a home that was always there. He had taken that tangible love and converted it into his own currency, leaving me with nothing but the hollow echo of his gratitude. I went to the small lockbox I kept at the back of my closet. Inside, nestled amid old passports, was a slim, worn ledger. My grandmother had taught me to be meticulous with money. Every cent I had ever given Leo was recorded there. The dates, the amounts, the purpose scrawled in my neat handwriting. March 14, $3,500, high-torque motor components. July 2, $10,000, titanium alloy casing. October 30, $60,000 microfilter matrix. Emeralds. My breath hitched. The emeralds was a later addition, a painful footnote. I flipped the page. May 5, $285,000, patent filing and initial production run. The house. There it was, the cold, hard math of my naivety, nearly $400,000. A fortune, a future, all gone. But the ledger was only part of the story. I opened my laptop and began a deeper excavation. I found old emails buried in archived folders, him pleading about a missed opportunity, me reassuring him. I scrolled back through years of text messages, taking screenshots. There it was in black and white. When this works, we're set for life, Elara. It's ours. I can't do this without you. You're my lucky charm. I found the photos. Pictures of us in the garage, him holding up a circuit board, me smiling beside him, covered in dust. Pictures of the first successful test, water spraying everywhere, our faces alight with joy. This wasn't just a financial transaction. This was a partnership, documented in pixels and promises. A plan began to form, not from a place of hot rage, but from a glacier-cold resolve. He thought he could write me out of his story. He thought he could sanitize his past into a tidy, self-made narrative. But I held the original manuscript. I wasn't going to scream or cry on his doorstep. That was what a scorned woman would do, and he would probably have security escort her away. No, I was going to speak a language he now understood perfectly. The language of leverage, of contracts, of public image. My first stop was a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the most ruthless, well-connected corporate litigator I could find. I used the last of my personal savings to secure a consultation with a woman named Miriam Vance, whose reputation for eviscerating fraudulent CEOs was legendary. Her office was all cool glass and steel, a world away from Leo's old garage. Miriam herself was a sharp, elegant woman in her 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. I laid it all out before her, the ledger, the emails, the texts, the photos. I told her the story, my voice steady, refusing to let it crack. She listened, her fingers steepled. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This is compelling," she said finally, tapping the ledger. "But gifts between romantic partners are notoriously difficult to reclaim. He will argue it was all given freely out of love, no expectation of return." "He promised me a partnership," I said, my voice low but firm. He said ours. This wasn't a gift. It was an investment in our shared future, an investment he has now fraudulently converted for his sole benefit. A slow, grim smile touched Miriam's lips. "Fraudulent inducement, promissory estoppel. We can argue that his promises were the sole reason you liquidated your assets, that without them you would never have parted with your inheritance. He benefited from those assets directly, and his subsequent abandonment of the partnership constitutes a breach of an implied contract." She leaned forward. "The court of law is one thing, but the court of public opinion is often faster. A story like this. A self-made man myth built on the back of a woman he discarded. It's toxic." A shiver ran down my spine. This was it, the first move in a game I never wanted to play. "What do we do?" I asked. "We start with a demand letter," Miriam said. "A very precise, very expensive-looking demand letter. We outline every penny with interest. We don't frame it as alimony or a lover's quarrel. We frame it as a debt, a business debt he has failed to honor. We give him 48 hours to respond with a settlement offer that reflects the true value of your investment, plus damages for the emotional distress and financial ruin his fraudulent actions have caused." "And if he ignores it?" Miriam's smile was cold. "Then, Ms. Elara, we take his shiny new public image and we give it the one thing it can't survive, a crack. We tell our story, to everyone." The demand letter arrived on a Tuesday. Miriam had it sent by a process server to his new office, ensuring it landed on his desk like a grenade with the pin already pulled. I imagined his face, the smooth corporate mask cracking for just a second as he read the cold, legal language that detailed his debt. $412,750. The principal, plus a calculated rate of interest. It was a number that couldn't be dismissed with a text message. His lawyer called Miriam within 6 hours. Not Leo. Of course not. He was already insulating himself, letting hired suits speak for him. The initial offer was an insult, $50,000. A goodwill gesture to avoid any unpleasantness. Miriam relayed the offer to me with a dry laugh. "He thinks this is a nuisance to be settled, not a debt to be paid." "Unpleasantness," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. My grandmother's house, reduced to a potential unpleasantness for his brand. "Counter," I said, my voice flat. "Full amount, no negotiation." The next 48 hours were a tense silence. I didn't leave my apartment. I watched the stock price of Aquasphere, a newly listed company, tick upward on my screen. Every fraction of a point it climbed felt like a tiny hammer blow. His success was being built, in part, with the bricks of my past. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number. A part of me knew, with a cold certainty, who it was. I answered. "Hello." "Elara." His voice was the same, but different. The warm, eager roughness was gone, sanded down into a polished, controlled baritone. It was the voice from the tech conference videos. "Leo." I kept my voice neutral, giving him nothing. "This is unnecessary," he began, his tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable, slightly wounded. "We had something beautiful. What you're doing tarnishes that, this legal threat. It's beneath you." "Beneath me?" A flicker of the old anger ignited, but I banked it, keeping my tone icy. "Selling my inheritance to fund your dream was beneath me. Being abandoned for a venture capitalist was beneath me. This is just business, Leo. You taught me that." He was silent for a moment. I could hear the soft hum of his luxury car in the background. "I'm willing to increase the offer. 100,000. It's more than fair. You have to see that this aggression won't end well for you." It was a threat, velvet-gloved but unmistakable. I have more money, more lawyers, more power than you. You will lose. Fair, I let out a short, humorless laugh. Fair was you keeping your promises. Fair was we. You redefine the terms, Leo, not me. The offer is $412,750. That is the price of my grandmother's house and her emeralds. That is the price of my trust. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. Elara, be reasonable. I was reasonable when I sold my history for your future. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a shard of glass. I'm done being reasonable. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. I placed the phone on the table and stared at it, half expecting it to ring again for him to unleash his fury. But it remained silent. The battle lines were drawn. The next morning, Miriam called. He's refusing. His lawyer says they will vigorously defend against these baseless and extortionate claims. They're preparing a motion to dismiss. I had expected it. He was betting I would fold, that I didn't have the stomach or the resources for a long, ugly fight. Then we moved to phase 2. I said, my voice steady. The court of public opinion, Miriam said. Are you ready? There's no going back once we do this. They will come for you. His lawyers, his PR team, his new friends. They will try to paint you as the bitter, gold-digging ex. Let them try, I said, looking at the photo on my wall, a picture of my grandmother, her eyes kind but fierce. The truth is a stubborn thing. I spent the afternoon with Miriam and a public relations consultant she trusted. We crafted the narrative carefully. It wasn't a jilted lover's rant. It was a story of a broken business partnership, of intellectual and financial contribution erased. We prepared a dossier, the ledger, the emails promising a shared future, the receipts for the sold jewelry, the property deed, juxtaposed with press photos of Leo and Aria Whitmore, the timeline of his rise and my financial decline. We chose the platform carefully, a respected, independent tech journalist known for digging into the human stories behind the startups. I reached out to her directly, offering her the exclusive. She was initially skeptical, but the dossier convinced her. The article went live at 8 a.m. on a Thursday. The headline was a masterclass in understated devastation. The cost of clean water, the erased partner behind Aquasphere's success. It spread like a wildfire in a dry forest. It wasn't on some obscure blog. It was in a publication the entire tech world read. The story was picked up by major news outlets within hours. The narrative was too compelling, too human. The brilliant, trusting woman, the sacrificial inheritance, the ambitious man who forgot the hands that built his ladder. By noon, #Aquasphere betrayal was trending. Comments flooded in. He built his empire on her grandmother's emeralds. This is the dark side of Silicon Valley. Where is the equity for Elara? I sat in my silent apartment, watching it unfold on my laptop. I felt no triumph, only a hollow, weary vindication. My phone began to blow up with calls from numbers I didn't know, requests for interviews, offers from other news shows. And then another call from the unknown number, Leo. This time his voice was stripped of all its polish. It was raw, panicked, and furious. What have you done? He hissed. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The board is in an emergency meeting. Aria is. He cut himself off, but the damage was done. I could hear the terror in his voice, the terror of losing it all. I know exactly what I've cost you, I said quietly into the phone. I've cost you the narrative, and in your world that's everything, isn't it? The line went dead. He had hung up. An hour later, Miriam called, her voice buzzing with a sharp energy. They've folded. His lawyers have contacted me. They are prepared to settle, for the full amount, and a further $250,000 as a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. They want you to sign, take the money, and never speak of this again. It was more money than I had asked for. It was a victory. It was my life back, financially at least. I looked out the window at the city, at the gleaming towers where men like Leo played their games. I thought of the garage, the shared dreams, the smell of oil and hope. I thought of my grandmother's emerald, now forever gone, a part of someone else's glittering facade. Tell them no, I said. Miriam was silent for a beat. Elara, this is a very significant offer. You would be secure. The money isn't the point anymore, Miriam, I said. It was never just about the money. It was about the erasure. If I take their money and sign their silence, he still wins. He gets to buy back his reputation and bury the truth. I won't let him. Tell them the only offer I will accept is the original $412,750. As a debt repaid. No NDA. No silence. I will not be paid to disappear. I could almost hear Miriam's smile through the phone. They won't like that. I don't care what they like, I said. This is my story, and I'm not finished telling it. The silence after my refusal was more ominous than any legal threat. It lasted 3 days. I knew it wasn't contemplation. It was the calm before a professionally orchestrated storm. It began with a blog post on a popular tech gossip site. The headline was slick and vicious. The other side of the erased partner, inside Elara's obsession and demands. The article, citing close associates of Leo, painted a chillingly alternate reality. I wasn't the supportive partner, I was clingy, controlling, and had smothered his genius. The money wasn't an investment, it was a series of desperate gifts to buy his affection and tie him down. They claimed I had become unhinged after the breakup, flooding his phone with texts and showing up uninvited at his office. A complete and terrifying fabrication. Miriam forwarded it to me with a single word. Started. The comments on the article were a sewer. She's just bitter he upgraded. Classic gold digger move. He owes her nothing. My hands trembled as I read it. This was their play. They couldn't win on the truth, so they would drown it in lies and misogynistic tropes. They were trying to make me into a caricature so that anything I said from now on would be seen through that filter. Then my phone rang. It was my old boss, his voice strained. Elara, I've had some calls from journalists asking about your mental state when you worked here. I'm sorry, but I can't have this associated with the firm. I was effectively fired from my freelance contract. The isolation was immediate and terrifying. This was the cost he had threatened. They were cutting me off from my livelihood. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. Aria Whitmore broke her silence, not with a statement but with a photograph. A paparazzi shot, perfectly timed, of her and Leo leaving a charity gala. She was in a stunning crimson gown, he in a tuxedo. They were holding hands, smiling. She looked strong, successful, unbothered. The caption in the tabloids wrote the story for them. Power couple unshaken by baseless claims. The message was clear. He is with me now. I am his future. She is a noisy ghost from an irrelevant past. It was a masterclass in silent, powerful contempt. I felt the ground crumbling beneath me. My truth was being systematically dismantled by their wealth and influence. I was being painted as the villain, the crazy ex, while they floated above it all, untouchable. I was sitting in the dark, staring at that picture of Leo and Aria, a cold despair seeping into my bones when my doorbell rang. I ignored it. It rang again, insistent. Cautiously, I peered through the peephole. A woman stood there, her back to the door. She turned and I saw her face. It was the journalist, Sarah Gable, who had broken the original story. I opened the door, stunned. You shouldn't be here, I said, my voice hoarse. They'll say I'm leaking to you. They're already saying everything else, she said bluntly, stepping inside. I'm not here for a story, I'm here as a source. She held up a USB drive. After my article ran, I started getting emails from women, 2 former employees of Aquasphere, 1 former intern from his college days, their stories. They have a familiar pattern. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took the drive and plugged it into my laptop. The files contained sworn, anonymous testimonies. The intern described how Leo had taken credit for her engineering project, a project that first put him on the map. One employee detailed how he'd manipulated performance metrics to secure the first round of angel funding. The other described a culture of fear and intimidation, of Leo verbally shredding anyone who questioned him. It was a pattern of using people, of taking their work, their credit, their energy, and discarding them when they were no longer useful. I wasn't an anomaly. I was the most expensive entry in a long list of casualties. He doesn't just betray lovers, Sarah said quietly. He betrays anyone who helps him. It's his operating system. You were just his biggest investor, both financially and emotionally. The cold despair in my chest began to harden into something else, something unyielding. This was no longer just about me and my grandmother's emeralds. This was about a sickness that went deeper, a pattern of exploitation that needed to be exposed. Leo and Arya thought they were playing a game of public relations. They thought they could use their power to silence me, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had attacked my character, my sanity, my ability to make a living. They had left me with nothing to lose. I looked at Sarah. Can you get me a meeting with these women, all of them? It's risky. They're terrified. Tell them, I said, a new, steely calm in my voice, that they won't be standing alone. Tell them the first investor is finally calling in the final debt. Not for money, for justice. The fight had changed. It was no longer Elara versus Leo. It was the truth, all of it, versus the carefully constructed lie of Leo Sterling. He thought he could bury me under an avalanche of falsehoods. He didn't realize that in doing so, he had unearthed the one thing more powerful than my pain, my purpose. The story was not over. It was just beginning to find its true voice. The meeting was held in the back room of a quiet, independent bookstore, a world away from Miriam's steel-end glass office. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and a palpable, shared anxiety. Sarah had done her work. They were here. There were 3 of them besides me. Chloe, the former intern, now a successful engineer at a rival firm. She clutched a coffee cup like a lifeline, her knuckles white. He told me it was a collaboration, she whispered, her voice trembling with old anger. My harmonic dampener design. He presented it as his own. When I confronted him, he said my contribution was noted in the team's overall effort. I was the team. Then there was Maya, a former operations manager at Aquasphere. She was older, her face etched with the stress of someone who had seen the machine from the inside. The due diligence reports for the Whitmore funding, she said, her tone flat and factual. He ordered me to alter the performance data from the field tests. The failure rates were 3 times higher than what we published. When I refused, he told me I lacked vision and commitment. He had a junior analyst do it instead. I resigned the next week. Finally, there was Isabel, a sharp, quiet woman who had been on the marketing team. It wasn't just the data, she said. It was the narrative. He crafted this entire self-made genius story, erasing every single person who helped him. He told us it was better for the brand to have a single, recognizable face. It was a lie. It was all a lie. I listened, my own heartache folding into a larger, colder fury. My story was not unique. It was a template. I was looking at 3 other versions of myself, each exploited and discarded in a different way. We have to go public, Chloe said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from our shared presence. All of us, together. Wait, Maya interjected, the pragmatist. If we do that, we're not just fighting Leo. We're fighting Aquasphere's legal team, Whitmore and Sons' influence, and their entire PR machine. They will destroy us. They've already started with Elara. They're already trying, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. They're calling me obsessed, a liar, a gold digger. They fired me from my job. They are trying to make me disappear. I looked at each of them. But they can't silence all of us, not if we speak together. A single voice is a target. A chorus is a movement. I slid the worn ledger to the center of the table. This is my proof, the financial truth. I then placed Sarah's USB drive beside it. And this is yours, the pattern. This isn't just about getting my money back. It's about stopping him from doing this to anyone else. It's about making sure the next brilliant, trusting woman he meets knows exactly who he is. A resolve settled over the room, fragile but unbreakable. We were no longer victims comparing wounds. We were a council of war. The plan was simple and devastating. We would not release a slow trickle of information. We would orchestrate a tsunami. Sarah would publish a comprehensive follow-up article, weaving our 4 stories into one undeniable narrative of systemic exploitation. We would release it simultaneously with a social media campaign, using a shared hashtag, the Sterling pattern. We would give interviews, not as bitter individuals, but as a united front, a coalition of the erased. The day it launched, the internet didn't just whisper, It roared. The article, titled The Sterling Pattern, a blueprint for betrayal in Silicon Valley, was a bomb. It connected the dots from Chloe's stolen intellectual property to Maya's fraudulent data to Isabel's enforced erasure to my financial and emotional evisceration. It was no longer a he said, she said. It was four she saids, backed by documents, timelines, and a chillingly consistent pattern of behavior. The Sterling Pattern began trending globally. The story was picked up not just by tech media, but by major news networks. The narrative shifted irrevocably. It was no longer a salacious breakup story. It was a scandal about fraud, corruption, and the toxic culture of startup idolatry. This time, the counterattack was weak, disjointed. They couldn't paint four different women from different walks of life as all being obsessed or liars. Aria Whitmore was photographed getting into a car, her face stony, refusing to answer questions. The power couple facade was cracking under the weight of our collective truth. The final blow came from within the castle walls. Miriam called me, her voice buzzing with a triumphant energy I hadn't heard before. The SEC has opened a formal investigation into Aquasphere based on the allegations of fraudulent data in their funding rounds. Whitmore and Sons has just announced they are pausing their further investment and conducting their own internal review. It was over. The money from investors was the lifeblood of his empire, and we had poisoned it. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived at my apartment. It was from Leo's lawyers. Not a threat, not a negotiation. It was an unconditional surrender. They agreed to repay the full $412,750, with interest, immediately and without a confidentiality agreement. Furthermore, Aquasphere's board, in an effort to save the company from total collapse, was offering an additional separate settlement to all four of us, Chloe, Maya, Isabel, and me, as a recognition of our contributions and to avoid further litigation. I stood by my window, the formal letter in my hand, watching the city. The Lamborghini was gone from the diamond cufflinks were irrelevant. I thought of my grandmother's emerald, not with the pain of its loss, but with the fierce, protective love it had represented. That love had not bought his dream. It had funded my awakening. The money was transferred within the hour. The number in my bank account was staggering. It was security. It was freedom. But the true victory wasn't the financial restitution. It was the quiet that followed. Not the silence of erasure, but the peace of justice served. Weeks later, the news broke that Leo Sterling had been forced to resign as CEO of Aquasphere. The company was restructuring, its valuation in ruins. Aria Whitmore was spotted at an airport, alone. The Golden City had proven to be a mirage. I used part of the money to buy a small, sun-filled studio with a view of the park. I started my own design firm, specializing in helping ethical startups build their brands. I named it Keystone, the first, the central stone that holds all the others in place. One evening, I was hanging a picture on the fresh, clean wall. It was the photo of my grandmother, her kind, fierce eyes looking out. I had had the image enlarged and framed. I didn't need the emerald anymore to feel her presence. I had something better. I had my story back, and it was finally completely my own.